The palace was huge. Towers stretched into the sky, and walls shone like silver under the sun. Inside, the main hall was even larger. Statues of strange creatures and shining crystals lined the walls. The floor was smooth and shiny, but it had dirt and dust that only a janitor could notice. The humans and aliens who visited the palace never paid attention to small things like dust, but the janitor did. The human janitor moved quietly through the hall. He was small and thin, with simple clothes that were worn and patched. His mop looked old, with frayed strings at the end, but he carried it like it was a tool of importance. The janitor worked slowly and carefully, dipping the mop into a bucket of water and cleaning each corner of the room. He did not rush and he did not speak. The alien emperor sat on his high throne. He was enormous, with skin that shone like bronze and eyes that glowed faintly. Around him were his advisors, generals, and scholars. They were tall, proud, and looked very serious. When they saw the human janitor, some laughed quietly. They whispered about how funny it was that such a small, weak creature walked in a place full of power and wealth. The emperor himself laughed loudly. "Look at him," he said. "A human. He thinks he belongs here. He is nothing but a cleaner. He is not strong, he is not clever, he is not important. He is only here to mop the floor." The court laughed along with him. Some aliens pointed and giggled. The janitor continued his work without looking up. He did not smile and he did not seem angry. He only kept cleaning. The emperor leaned forward on his throne. "Tell me, janitor," he said, his voice deep and booming, "why do you waste your life here? Humans are weak. You are weak. You should stay at home where you are safe." The janitor stopped for a moment. He looked at the emperor, his eyes calm. He did not answer. Then he returned to his mop, moving slowly, carefully, as if nothing mattered but the floor. The court laughed even harder. "He does not even speak," one advisor whispered. "He is truly nothing." But the janitor noticed things the others did not. The cracks in the marble floor, the dust that hid in the corners, the faint footprints of the emperor's guards. He moved quietly, cleaning each place with patience. He worked like this every day, unnoticed, unimportant, and ignored. Yet he knew the palace better than anyone. He had walked these halls more times than any general or scholar. He knew where the sun shone in the morning, where the shadows moved, and where the floor was weakest. A small child alien ran past him, laughing and chasing a ball. The janitor smiled softly. Not a human smile that said pride or anger, but a quiet smile that showed understanding. He moved the mop gently so the child did not slip. "Careful," he said, his voice soft but firm. The child nodded and ran away. None of the emperor's court noticed this. They were too busy laughing at him. The emperor grew tired of the janitor's silence. "Do you even know who I am?" he asked. "I am the ruler of this galaxy. Every planet, every star answers to me. And you are nothing. Tell me, human, what makes you think you belong here?" The janitor did not look up. He continued mopping a stain that had been there for years. "I belong where I am needed," he said quietly. His voice was small, but it carried across the hall. The court fell silent for a moment. The emperor's laughter stopped. He frowned. No one had ever answered him like this. But then the court erupted in laughter again. "What does he mean? Needed?" one general said. "A mop is needed? A human is needed? This is ridiculous." They laughed louder this time. The janitor kept cleaning, slow and steady. Even as the laughter continued, the janitor felt something strange in the air. The palace felt different today. The lights from the crystals flickered slightly, and the shadows moved in a way he had never noticed before. He did not stop, but he watched carefully. His hand on the mop was steady. He had seen things no one else saw. He had learned things no one else noticed. The emperor shook his head, still laughing. "This human is amusing. Let him mop. Let him think he matters." He leaned back on his throne, confident and proud. Everyone in the hall followed his lead. They thought humans were weak, unimportant, and nothing to fear. The janitor finished his path along one side of the hall. He picked up the bucket and moved toward a corner that the court had ignored. The emperor watched with mild curiosity but no real concern. After all, what could a human janitor do? He was small. He was weak. He had a mop. That was all. The janitor knelt down and began to clean the corner. As he moved the mop, the light from the crystals reflected strangely off the wet floor. A faint shimmer appeared. The emperor noticed it but thought it was nothing. He smiled and returned to his laughter. The janitor worked quietly, moving carefully, watching every shadow and every crack. He did not need anyone's respect. He did not want the emperor's laughter to stop him. He only needed to do his work perfectly and patiently as he always had. No one in the hall paid attention to the janitor's careful eyes or his slow, deliberate motions. They did not notice the small hints of power hiding in the simplest of actions. They only saw a weak human, a mop, and a job that seemed unimportant. But the janitor knew better. And something told him that one day, the Emperor's laughter would not be enough to cover the truth. After finishing his path in the main hall, the human janitor carried the bucket carefully along a narrow corridor. The walls here were old, covered in strange carvings that the court never noticed. The corridor smelled faintly of dust and water, and the air was cooler. No one came here. Guards passed by sometimes, but they ignored him, thinking he was harmless. The janitor moved slowly, his mop resting on his shoulder. He stopped at a door carved with symbols that glowed faintly under the light. The door was locked, or at least the Emperor had claimed it was forbidden. Ordinary humans would have stayed away. Ordinary aliens would have laughed and walked past. But the janitor did not hesitate. He pressed his hand against the carvings and the symbols responded. They shimmered and pulsed gently. He whispered a few words. They were soft and quiet, almost like a song. Not a spell, not a threat, just a rhythm he had learned long ago. The mop in his hand seemed to react. The water at its strings began to glow faintly. The janitor smiled, but only a little. He knew that the court would never understand this. They only saw a man cleaning, nothing more. The janitor began cleaning the floor in a circle around the door. Each stroke of the mop traced patterns he had practiced for years. Dust disappeared in strange swirls, leaving the floor shining in a way that made the carvings shimmer brighter. The janitor hummed quietly, matching the rhythm of his mop. He had learned to move in silence, to work without notice, but always with purpose. The air around the corridor changed. It grew heavier, but not in a frightening way. More like a quiet expectation. The janitor felt it and did not stop. He dipped the mop again, moving carefully, tracing each pattern perfectly. He remembered the old stories humans told among themselves. Stories of times when humans could speak to dragons. Times when they were not the weak ones. The stories had been forgotten by most, but he remembered. A shadow moved in the corridor. The janitor noticed it from the corner of his eye, but he did not flinch. A small guard peeked around the corner. He wanted to see what the human was doing. The janitor kept working, slow and steady. The mop moved across the floor, leaving trails that glowed faintly in the dim light. The guard leaned closer. The janitor looked at him briefly. "Go back," he said quietly but firmly. The guard nodded, eyes wide, and left. The janitor continued. The mop was not ordinary. It had been made long ago by humans who had remembered the old ways. It could call things that listened to care, to patience, and to respect. The janitor did not need to fight. He only needed to move carefully, with focus and with trust. The mop, the floor, and his own hands did the rest. A faint sound came from the ceiling like wind through a cave. The janitor paused for a moment, listening. Nothing moved in the corridor except for the mop and the symbols. The carvings on the door began to shine brighter, reacting to his cleaning. He could feel the old energy waking. It was quiet but powerful. He smiled slightly, thinking of what might come next. The janitor whispered another word, soft as a breeze. The water on the mop seemed to float slightly, glowing more brightly. The symbols on the door pulsed in response as if acknowledging him. He had done this many times in secret for years. The court had never noticed. The Emperor had never noticed. Only he, a simple human janitor, had the knowledge and patience to do it right. He finished the circle around the door. The glow from the mop reflected in his calm eyes. He dipped it one last time and moved it across the floor in a straight line, connecting all the glowing symbols. The air in the corridor seemed to hold its breath. The janitor stepped back and looked at the door. It shimmered now, quiet and still, like it was waiting. A soft sound came from beyond the door, a low hum that made the floor vibrate slightly. The janitor's heart did not race. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. Humans had forgotten many powers, but he remembered the ones that mattered. The mop in his hand was more than a tool. It was a key, a guide, a reminder of what humans once were. The janitor crouched slightly and whispered another word, almost too soft to hear. The door began to move. It did not swing open quickly like an ordinary door. It slid slowly, smoothly, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Inside, shadows moved, but the shapes were not ordinary. Something ancient and alive was waiting. The janitor did not hesitate. He entered, carrying his mop like a staff, steady and calm. He knew the Emperor would never believe it if he saw this. The court would laugh and call it a trick. But the janitor did not care. He was here for duty, for patience, and for the promise humans had once kept. He moved across the chamber, his mop glowing, his eyes calm. Something stirred inside, not violent, not angry, but alive and respectful. It answered to the human who had never raised his voice, who had never asked for praise, who had only done his work. The janitor paused in the center of the chamber. The shadows shifted closer and the air felt warmer. He smiled softly. The work was only beginning. The dragons, the guardians of old, were waiting for the one who remembered. And that one was him, the human janitor, small and unnoticed, yet more important than anyone in the palace could imagine. He raised his mop slightly. The glow reflected in the chamber, bright and steady. Outside, the emperor laughed, unaware of what had started. Inside, the janitor worked, calling old powers to life, moving carefully, with patience, and with a quiet strength that no alien could understand. The chamber was quiet except for the soft drip of water from the janitor's mop. The light from its wet strings shimmered on the walls, making the shadows move slowly. The human janitor stood in the center, calm and steady, his eyes scanning the room. He had been here before many times, but today something felt different. The air felt heavier, full of expectation. The mop in his hands was not ordinary. It looked old and simple, worn at the edges, but it held power. Long ago, humans had been caretakers of dragons, not by force but by trust and respect. The mop was a tool of that old duty. It could call creatures that listened to patience, that recognized care, and that answered to those who remembered the old ways. Most humans had forgotten this. The janitor had not. He moved the mop slowly across the floor, tracing patterns that had been passed down in stories, in whispers, in quiet lessons no one else remembered. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter as he worked. The mop seemed to drink in the light, and in return, it shared its glow with the room. It was not magic exactly, at least not like the emperor believed in. It was human knowledge, human discipline, and human patience made real. The shadows in the chamber began to shift. At first, they were small shapes, like the flutter of wings in the distance. The janitor did not move quickly. He did not raise his voice. He simply moved the mop in slow, precise motions, speaking a few quiet words that sounded like a song. The shadows grew larger, forming shapes that were not ordinary. They were dragons, their scales faintly shimmering in the soft light of the mop. The janitor watched them carefully. They did not roar and they did not attack. They waited. They had recognized the one who remembered. The one who moved with patience, who understood the old promises, who cared without expectation of reward. He had called them not with force but with respect. A faint rumble filled the chamber as the dragons circled above. Their wings were massive, and the shadows stretched across the walls like living patterns. The janitor did not flinch. He had expected this. He had trained for it, silently, over years of work no one noticed. The mop was not a cleaning tool anymore. It was a staff, a key, a symbol of human power hidden in plain sight. He moved in a slow circle, dipping the mop in the water and letting it shine across the floor. Each motion seemed to answer the dragons, each word he whispered strengthened the bond. He had never raised his voice and he did not need to. Humans had always been small, weak, unnoticed. But small things could hold great power when used with care and knowledge. A dragon lowered its head toward him. Its eyes were large, glowing faintly, full of intelligence. The janitor did not bow. He simply nodded slightly and the dragon recognized the gesture. Others followed. They hovered silently, wings moving slowly, creating shadows that danced across the walls and ceiling. The janitor's heart did not race. He felt calm. He knew the dragons were his allies, not his subjects. They respected him because he had remembered. Outside the chamber, the emperor continued his laughter in the main hall. He did not know the janitor had disappeared into a hidden corner. He thought humans were weak, unimportant, and unworthy of attention. He was wrong. The janitor was not strong like a warrior, and he did not need to be. His strength was in memory, in patience, and in duty. That was more than enough. The janitor spoke quietly again. The dragons responded with soft movements, circling higher and lower, but never touching him. They were not toys. They were guardians. They had waited for centuries for someone who would call them without arrogance, without violence, and without fear. Humans had once been the ones to keep balance, to guide these creatures, and the janitor had remembered what others had forgotten. A faint glow appeared along the floor where the mop had moved. The symbols seemed to pulse in rhythm with the janitor's steps. The dragon's wings brushed the walls softly, leaving small sparks in the air. The janitor smiled slightly. He did not need to shout. He did not need to fight. The mop, the floor, and his quiet knowledge had already done the work. The chamber seemed alive now. Shadows of dragons stretched across the walls, reflecting in the glowing patterns. The janitor felt the power, but he did not let it change him. He was still a simple human, a janitor. He was still unnoticed, at least by the court outside. That was part of the beauty. Power did not always need attention. Sometimes it only needed patience, care, and memory. The dragons lowered closer to the floor. Their eyes met his, one by one. They were waiting for a command, but not a violent one. They waited for guidance, for respect. The janitor moved the mop in a slow, deliberate circle. The glow from the water spread across the floor. He whispered one final word. Outside the chamber, a faint vibration could be felt. The palace walls seemed to hum slightly. Something was awakening. The emperor laughed, thinking it was a joke. The court continued their chatter, unaware that the human they mocked had started a power none of them had seen before. The janitor looked at the dragons. They moved closer, circling around him, quiet but present. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The mop, the water, and the old human knowledge had already done what no alien army could do. He was small, unnoticed, and calm. Yet here, in this hidden chamber, he held the attention of creatures no one else could command. And in that moment, the janitor understood that humans were not weak. They were small, yes. They were quiet. They were overlooked. But when used with patience, respect, and memory, their smallness could command power that even an emperor could not imagine. The mop was not just a mop. It was a key, a guide, and a reminder. And the human janitor, simple and steady, was ready for the next step. The main hall of the palace was bright and full of laughter. The emperor sat on his throne, still smiling at the human janitor. He had no idea that the small man he mocked was already in a hidden chamber, calling powers long forgotten. The court continued their chatter, unaware of the faint vibrations that now traveled through the walls. Something was stirring outside, but they did not notice. The janitor stepped out of the hidden chamber. He carried his mop carefully, glowing softly from the water and the symbols he had traced. His footsteps were quiet, but the air around him seemed to hum with life. He walked toward the balcony that overlooked the palace grounds. Outside, the sky was calm, pale blue with a few floating clouds. But the janitor knew it would not stay calm for long. He raised the mop slowly. The glow from its strings reflected in his calm eyes. He whispered a soft, steady word, the rhythm clear and quiet. The air shifted. A faint sound reached the palace walls, a soft rumble like distant thunder. The courtiers glanced around, frowning. They had not heard anything like this before. The emperor, still laughing, waved them back to attention. "Ignore it," he said. "It is nothing. Humans are weak. Do not fear a janitor." But the janitor did not stop. He moved the mop in deliberate circles, connecting patterns that no one else could see. The vibrations in the air grew stronger. A shadow appeared in the distance, moving slowly across the horizon. At first it was small, almost invisible. But it grew larger, stretching across the sky. The emperor leaned forward, puzzled. "What is that?" he asked, his voice slightly higher than usual. The shadow grew faster. The humans and aliens on the balcony noticed it now. The shape was huge, moving with power and grace. Wings stretched wide, reflecting sunlight. The courtiers gasped. The emperor's laughter faltered. "Impossible," he whispered. He looked at the janitor. The small human still held his mop calmly, as if nothing unusual was happening. Then the first dragon appeared fully. Its scales shone like bronze and gold. Its eyes were intelligent, calm, and aware. It circled above the palace silently, not attacking, not roaring. More dragons followed, dozens in total, their wings creating shadows across the palace walls. Their size was enormous, but their movements were gentle, precise. They were guardians, not weapons. The janitor moved the mop slowly, leading them in patterns across the palace grounds. The dragons responded instantly. They flew above the palace in formation, each one adjusting to his quiet commands. The emperor stepped back on his throne, eyes wide. The courtiers froze. None of them had ever seen anything like this. The human they mocked, the one they considered weak, was controlling creatures far greater than any army in the galaxy. One dragon lowered its head, looking directly at the janitor. The small man nodded slightly, and the dragon hovered in place. Others followed, forming circles and arcs across the sky. The light from their scales reflected on the palace walls, creating moving patterns that shimmered like water. The janitor's calm presence controlled the creatures, not force, not weapons, but patience and understanding. The emperor struggled to speak. This cannot be. A human, controlling dragons. His voice shook. The court murmured, fear and awe spreading through the hall. They had always thought humans were weak. They had laughed at the janitor's mop. And yet, here he was, small and calm, while creatures that dwarfed them all listened to him. The janitor spoke quietly, but the dragons seemed to hear every word. They moved as one, circling higher and lower, creating patterns in the sky above the palace. No sound of violence came from them. They were guardians showing power through respect, not fear. The courtiers realized that humans had strength they could not understand. The janitor's calmness, his knowledge, his patience had awakened something ancient. The emperor's pride began to crumble. He had mocked humans, laughed at their size and weakness, and assumed that strength was only in force. Now he saw that power could be quiet, steady, and disciplined. The janitor, small and unnoticed, held more influence in his hands than the greatest general, the wisest scholar, and the strongest warrior combined. The janitor moved his mop one last time, creating a circle of light that connected the dragons above. They hovered in formation, silent but alert, waiting for his guidance. The emperor swallowed hard, unable to laugh. The court was silent, watching in awe. Every alien in the hall realized that the human they had dismissed had earned respect through patience, understanding, and knowledge. The janitor lowered his mop and smiled softly. The dragons hovered in the sky, calm and obedient. They were not soldiers. They were partners, guardians who answered only to the one who remembered old promises. The emperor felt something he had never felt before: humility. He had judged too quickly. He had laughed too soon. And now he saw that humans were far more than he had ever imagined. The dragon's wings created shadows across the palace walls, shimmering in patterns no one else could replicate. The janitor looked up at them quietly, calm and steady. The emperor realized that the laughter had ended. The moment had passed. Respect had been earned, not through fear or force, but through patience, care, and knowledge. The janitor did not boast. He did not shout. He simply stood, small and calm, while dragons filled the sky above the palace. And in that moment, everyone in the hall understood that humans were not weak. They were small, unnoticed, and quiet, but when they acted with patience, respect, and wisdom, they could command power that even an emperor could not imagine. The dragons hovered above the palace, wings slow and steady, their shadows stretching across the marble floors. The human janitor stood on the balcony, calm and quiet, his mop glowing softly in the morning sun. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand respect. He only moved with patience as he always had, and the dragons responded instantly. Their enormous forms filled the sky, yet they moved with care, as if protecting the palace and everyone inside it. Inside the main hall, the emperor stared at the sky. His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time he felt something unfamiliar: humility. He had mocked the human janitor, laughed at his small size and simple tools, and believed he was nothing. And yet, here was a human controlling dragons larger than anything the aliens had ever seen. The courtiers whispered nervously. Their laughter from earlier was gone. Fear and awe replaced it. The janitor lowered his mop slowly, keeping his eyes on the dragons. He did not command them harshly. He only guided them gently, carefully. The creatures circled in perfect formation, their scales shining like polished metal. The emperor swallowed hard. He realized that humans were not weak. They were small, yes, and quiet, but their power was patient, clever, and disciplined. Strength did not always come from muscle or weapons. Sometimes it came from care, knowledge, and respect. The emperor stood from his throne. His usual confidence was gone. He looked at the janitor, really looked at him for the first time. "Human," he said slowly, I have judged you unfairly. I thought you were weak, unimportant, and small. I was wrong." The janitor said nothing, only nodded slightly. His eyes were calm, his posture steady. "I have laughed at you," the emperor continued. "I have thought my power meant more than it does. But you have shown me that strength is not always loud. You have shown me that patience, care, and understanding are worth more than armies or weapons." The courtiers shifted nervously, listening in silence. No one dared interrupt. The janitor finally spoke, his voice soft but firm. "I do my work. I clean. I watch. I remember. I do not need praise. I do not need reward. But if respect is offered, it should be earned, not demanded." His words carried through the hall like a gentle wind. The dragons above seemed to respond, their wings slowing, hovering in calm patterns. The emperor nodded. "You have earned my respect," he said quietly. "And not just mine. You have shown everyone here that humans are not weak. You have reminded us of something we forgot long ago. From this day forward, humans will not be overlooked in my empire. They will be honored, guided, and valued. And you, Janitor, will be our guide to remember what we have lost. The Janitor did not move quickly. He did not demand applause. He simply lowered his mop and nodded. The dragons above shifted slightly, then flew higher into the sky, wings creating long shadows across the palace. They were no longer a threat, no longer a surprise. They were guardians, calm and respectful, and they left as quietly as they had appeared, leaving only the feeling of awe behind. The courtiers whispered among themselves. Many were afraid. Many were amazed. No one had ever imagined that a human, so small and quiet, could hold such influence. The Emperor watched the Janitor and realized that the truth was simple. Humans did not need to show power with noise or weapons. Their patience, discipline, and understanding could command forces greater than anything else in the galaxy. The Janitor returned to his bucket and mop. He moved slowly along the palace floor, cleaning once more, carefully and quietly. The Emperor observed him, humbled. He realized that the Janitor's strength was in his smallness, his humility, and his dedication. He did not need titles, armies, or recognition. He only needed purpose. From that day forward, humans were treated differently in the palace. They were no longer servants or outsiders. They were advisors, observers, and respected members of the Emperor's court. Other humans, watching quietly, smiled. They had always known their value even when others had not. The Janitor remained the same. He still cleaned, still moved with patience, still kept watch. He did not boast. He did not demand. He simply did what he had always done, quietly and steadily, while the Emperor and the court learned to respect him. The Emperor looked up at the sky, imagining the dragons circling above, waiting for the Janitor's calm guidance. He understood that humans were not weak. They were quiet, small, and unassuming, but when they acted with care and knowledge, they could achieve what no empire could force. And in that lesson the Emperor found humility. The Janitor finished his path along the palace floor, dipping the mop one last time. He paused for a moment, glancing up at the balcony where the Emperor stood. The Emperor nodded in silent acknowledgement, and the Janitor returned to work. No applause, no fanfare, just quiet purpose. And in that quiet purpose, the human Janitor showed everyone that true power did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it waited. And sometimes, it could call dragons from the sky without lifting a sword. The palace was quiet, full of awe, and filled with new respect. The human Janitor continued his work, small, calm, and unnoticed in appearance, yet holding more power and wisdom than anyone around him could ever imagine. Humans had been overlooked for centuries. Not anymore.